How is it that a parent's violence becomes the tragedy of the child? The reason for that is because contempt becomes the basis of every relationship. So here's the first time I encountered a tiger mom. I was in first grade and I had this friend who wasn't allowed to watch TV or play games or have anyone over except like between Friday to Sunday, whatever it was. And I'm not saying that this approach to parenting can't have success. If I had to bet on it, I would bet that my old friend has done pretty well for himself by now. But sometimes I wonder at what cost? And what is success, really? Because that type of parenting, when you take it to its Aristotelian excess, and by that I mean something that's far from what my 7-year-old self saw, just so we're clear, it can have lasting social and psychological damage to the kids of these parents. It's a big problem in South Korea, which has a high suicide rate for young people, and that is where like mother, like daughter takes place. This is one of the best written stories that I've encountered, not just on Webtoon, but anywhere in recent years. So let's start exploring its amazing storytelling techniques by looking at the fundamental theme. Ask yourself, when does a good person become evil? And this is an important question because unless you're a psychopath like Shogo Makishima from Psycho-Pass, you probably aren't born evil. So when does a good person fall over that line, and why do some people stay good no matter what? This webtoon looks at the question in a unique way by having its abused hero teeter on the line between good and evil. So it keeps its readers interested with a compelling story question. Will the abused become like her abuser? Here's how the story begins. I can't overstate how important it is for your story to have a good villain. Can you have a good story without one? Yes. Homer's Iliad, for starters. But a story is about conflict, and a good villain is the most convenient way to give your main character that. Like Mother Like Daughter gets started right away. We learn that the main character Somyung had a normal family, but it didn't stay normal for long. Her dad mysteriously disappeared, with worse to come. Then we see Somyoung's mom for the first time, and we see her micromanaging to the point that she says her daughter's hairline needs to be corrected because it's not perfect. So let's get you some bangs until then. Somyoung got all this attention while her brother Myungjin, let's go with that, was left to himself, to the point that their mom didn't even get him braces for his crooked teeth because he was, quote, unfixable. It calls to mind one of those beloved shows for us 90s kids, Hey Arnold, where Olga Pataki was seen as the perfect achiever and her younger sister Helga was neglected, but this story is much darker. It's to the point that Somyoung's mom tries to propagandize her into believing her brother is a bad kid, even though you as the reader see that he really isn't. You probably know where this is eventually going. Myungjin is found dead in a river. Somyoung is smart, and as you can see here, she has good reasons to suspect that he didn't really drown, and now she can't live in denial about her situation anymore. You never had to live as her kid. Somyoung now realizes that she was abused like her brother, just differently. But what's really good about this is that for now, Somyung is an unreliable narrator. She doesn't know for sure that her mother killed her brother, and so you don't know for sure either. Somyung is dead set on revenge anyway. And when you see her mom basically torturing her with the suspected poisoned juice box, you can understand why. Look what a good girl you're being, listening to your mother. Everything I say is for you. Revenge doesn't come easy though. Somyoung has a panic attack that leads her to throwing the juice box away, which was her best evidence. She knows she's too powerless right now. So what's she supposed to do? She's desperate. She needs to do something because she's afraid that if she gets on her mom's bad side, she'll wind up dead too. Somyoung wants revenge, but her immediate goal is just to survive. And that means she has to get out of her house as fast as possible. She needs to be independent first, so that if she actually wants to get revenge, she's in a position to accuse her mom of wrongdoing. But that brings another problem with it. Life in Seoul is pretty damn expensive, and Somyoung is just a kid. So the only choice for now is to go to a specialized boarding high school. That becomes her laser focused goal in middle school, and it means she has to get good grades and stay out of trouble. Her mom even said she'd help her if she performed exactly like the perfect puppet, and Somyoung doesn't like that, but since their interests in this case are aligned, she goes along with it. But like so many things in life, you're unfortunately not the only thing that controls what you do. Somyoung finds a friend named Namsu. She seems like a good friend at first, but you see early on that she's a danger to Somyoung's quest. This bit in chapter 4 was a brilliant use of foreshadowing. And Namsu isn't wrong. Except for Siyun, Somyoung basically has no friends. It gets darker though. Unfortunately, Namsu turns out to be a pathological liar. She comes from a family that's not so well off, and she's desperate to live out a fantasy where she's affluent and popular. She gets jealous of Somyoung early, betrays her trust, and tells one lie after another to project this fantasy version of herself. And she uses Somyoung to do it. Sometimes she spreads rumors about Somyoung and puts her down to look good. But Somyoung doesn't retaliate, at least at first, for understandable reasons. She wants to stay out of trouble. So what the story does here is build up to a volcanic eruption that is so satisfying, but only for a moment. After Somyoung unwittingly sniffed out one of the many lies Namsu told, Namsu tried to frame her for cheating on her final exam, and then she unwisely taunted Somyoung about her brother. And now Somyoung finally loses it. Namsu awakens a part of Somyoung that I like to call Stone Cold Somyoung. Because when she's pushed too far, she can't control how violent she gets. In 6th grade, she hit someone so hard she knocked her target's teeth out. She started going to a psychologist after that, and she's diagnosed with something called intermittent explosive disorder, where she's unable to consider the consequences her outbursts of anger might bring. Case in point, she hits her teacher in episode 23, and even though he deserved it, you see just how capable of violence Somyoung is. Ironically, the therapist tells Somyoung's mom how the disorder developed. It could be that frequent exposure to uncontrollable stress during childhood increased the likelihood of it developing. When Namsu gets Somyoung too deep in her shit, Somyoung attacks her with a chair, and she stalks her, waiting for her outside the room she's taken cover in, looking like she's been possessed by a murderous spirit. But as satisfying as this is, I was popping like I popped when I watched Stone Cold Steve Austin beat the crap out of a well-deserving Vince McMahon back in better times. It's also a tragedy because this is the cycle of abuse in action. You know it in hindsight, but what's brilliant about this series is that it's still only hinted at. Remember, we still have no proof that Sumyoung's mom murdered her son. So far, she's only guilty of helicopter parenting that goes way over the line. Only Sumyoung has actually revealed herself as being 100% potentially dangerous. So, whose side are we, the readers, supposed to be on? It's Sumyoung's by default because she's been wronged, you suspect the mother of murder, and Namsu is horrible, but you see what Sumyoung is capable of, and that puts a doubt in your mind about whether she can actually stay on the heroic side of the line forever, and Sumyoung's personality gets scarier than that. Sumyoung would be a great military strategist if she got the chance to be. She's creative, she can plan far ahead, and she has an extreme capacity for deception. These are good qualities when put to good use, but it depends on what side of the battlefield you're on, right? Because they can also be used for great evil. Who is Sumyoung going to use these skills on then? That question is another way this story keeps its tension. For now, it's her mom, so she stays good. She starts her first true campaign on the defensive, ironically to protect Namsu, because no matter how much Namsu has wronged her, she doesn't want her to die, and mommy is always lurking in the background. The thing about Namsu is that as bad as she's still not beyond redemption. You can still hope for her to get better. The retaliation against her starts to go too far compared to what she actually did, so you as the reader now start to feel bad for her. Sumyoung makes this clearer when she notes the similarities between Namsu and her brother, and those similarities are much grimmer when Sumyoung sees her mom taking surveillance camera footage and collecting intel on Namsu. Now something seems really wrong, and it only adds to her stress of trying to get into the specialized high school. She does not want to make the analogy complete. I have to do whatever it takes to stop my mom. Sumyoung now takes extreme care of Namsu, which means that she stays on the good guy side of the line still by appearing as a noble defender of the weak. She even takes a punch for her. She's paying a big price though because she's going out of her mind. She displays her dark side too, and now the title comes to life with manipulation and methods that would make mommy proud. I should make use of what my mom taught me, don't you think? The tension increases. Sumyoung's mom weaves her web at her daughter's most vulnerable time when she's going to take the specialized high school test. Namsu conveniently goes missing at that time. Sumyoung will now do anything to finger her mom in Namsu's disappearance and eventual death, or get peace of mind if she wasn't actually involved. There's an SD card from her car that she thinks could be evidence, and she blackmails her deserving teacher for the money and then plays an elaborate game to get it. And it is the most tense part of this story so far. It basically turns Like Mother Like Daughter into a spy thriller for a little while. And after some close calls, lo and behold, the footage before Namsu's disappearance is gone, and it's replaced by a text file, and Sumyoung bugs out. I did too. And just when you thought Sumyoung's stress couldn't get any worse, she has to act normally when Namsu gets found as a corpse. It's so absurd that The tragedy almost becomes a comedy, but that is what this story can do. It makes the tragedy of abuse so all encompassing that the characters sometimes can only deal with it by blurring that line. Suddenly, everyone pities Namsu, and you do too. Dear Somyung, hello. I know I probably met up with you after the exam, but it's me, Namsu. Your birthday is in fall and I didn't have the chance to give you a letter or a gift, so I feel a bit embarrassed that it's the first time. I prepared it in secret with your mom. What do you think? Are you surprised? You don't get surprised easily, so I'm already curious about your reaction. I bought these cookies with the idea of cheering you on for the SATs. I know this isn't the SATs, but I know it's equally as important to you. I'm so sorry I did that to you during the finals, knowing this exam was so important. I'm sorry I was mean to you and said all those horrible things about your brother, too. Eat this during snack time and do your best on the exam. I really hope you get into that high school. I know you said you and I were over, but I'm still going to do my best for you, at least until we graduate. I hope we can stay in touch even when we get into high school. Thank you always, Somyung. Sincerely, Namsu. And just when you do pity Namsu and she seems to redeem herself, all doubt about Somyoung's mom is gone. She even decides to get rid of worthless beasts in a bird nest if you needed any further doubt about her cruelty. So now you know for a fact that Somyoung's mom did indeed murder her son and Namsu, taking away the ability for them to grow up and change. And to make matters worse, Somyoung doesn't get into the specialized high school, so she has no choice but to stay with that woman. You've seen Somyoung slowly deteriorate through the course of the story so far, and she actually now expects her mom to kill her for being less than perfect for the first time. But instead, she finds herself being comforted, which basically just fucks with her mind more and enables more abuse in the future. She's so mentally upset that she gets physically sick, and she convinces herself that Siyun is a spy for her mom just because he has doubts about some wild plan of hers. So she responds by cutting her only true blue friend out of her life. That's how messed up she is. Somyoung starts to feel terribly lonely now. She thinks no one would believe her for good reason, and her mom just gets more controlling. Even though she's already installed a location and spy app, she wants to limit Somyoung's phone use. Somyoung cleverly takes advantage of this by getting an old flip phone from the better world that was the 2000s so her mom can't track her anymore. But you can see that Somyoung has been completely defeated, and it's just one last half-hearted jab before the end of the fight. And so we reach the peak of Somyoung's good guy arc, the height of her sympathy, when she concludes that she really doesn't know why she needs to live anymore. The girl that fought so hard for her survival is now entertaining the idea that maybe life isn't all that important. But then, and this was the moment, the friendship that determined the meaning of my life began. This is also the moment when Somyoung's arc as this story's top babyface comes to an end. In episode 40, Somyoung's mom warns her daughter not to get involved with people that smoke. So when Somyoung sees Seoul for the first time, she gets nervous. There she is, smoking and on a motorcycle looking like Pris from Bubblegum Crisis. Actually, Seoul reminds me of her in more ways than that, but I'll talk about Bubblegum Crisis in a future video. Subscribe for that. Somyoung is fascinated but scared, so she runs. And then at her darkest moment, Seoul comes in, and just like her name implies, she's a ray of sunshine in the rain. Seoul is a cheerful and extroverted girl, so she's exactly the kind of friend Somyoung needs right now. There's a few chapters where they have a lot of fun together too. And Somyoung says she's looking forward to tomorrow again. We haven't seen that for a while. There's a lot to like about Seoul. She quickly became my favorite character in this comic, and I'm probably not alone here. But as you might have guessed, this piece is short-lived. Somyoung discovers that Seoul has bad bruises. She says it's from a training accident, but Somyoung is smart enough to know when two and two don't add up. When she comes over, Somyoung sees this. Seoul brushes it off. We learn her parents divorced and she lives with her mom, who's annoyed because she's more like her dad in personality. To tilt readers' sympathies further towards Seoul, she lives in a half-basement rental apartment. It's a far thing from Somyoung's affluence. Then Somyoung watches as Seoul's mother beats her. Those beatings continue and Seoul brushes them off, especially because her mom then acts nice to her afterward. It's no big deal. Here we see two different ways that people respond to abuse, and what I like about this is that their responses are the opposite of their appearances. Somyoung looks and acts like the good girl, but her instinct is to rebel against her abuser, even if she's openly obedient. Seoul looks and acts like the bad girl, but responds to the abuse with a cycle of denial and avoidance. Somyoung naturally tries to convince Seoul that it's wrong and she should get help, but this is where the heel turn begins. So, is Somyoung doing this because she wants to look out for Seoul, or is it because she thinks Seoul is a useful escape item for her to basically get away from her own problems? You might have heard of Immanuel Kant's stress on the idea that to be ethical, people should be treated as ends in themselves rather than as a means to an end, and this Kantian philosophical question is very important for Somyoung's alignment going forward. Things keep getting worse for Seoul. We see she's not really good at skating, her supposed athletic pursuit. Somyoung thinks she is, but she's not. Even her supposed friends don't think too much of her. She doesn't get good grades. She has to see her dad move on to another family. She gets into a hit and run accident that seemingly ends any athletic potential she had. She gets a dirtbag boyfriend that abuses her too. And she even goes to a hospital for an untreated STI. This is another example of the cycle of abuse in action. To me, I feel like you get drawn to people who treat you the way your mother does. But that's the tragedy of the cycle. Seoul has been so abused for so long that she knows no other life. She not only thinks it's normal, but resists getting help. As abused as she was, Somyoung was never like that. Seoul's life, by every objective measurement, sucks. All she knows is abuse and failure. She's a good person with a good heart, but it's also an act of denial in a way. Her good heart is all she has left to not give in to total despair the way Somyoung almost did. Somyung is the only one that looks out for Seoul, but for whose sake? You feel hurt, but you don't say anything about it. How is that okay? Am I supposed to believe that simply ignoring it makes it okay? Well, I'm not going to ignore it. As someone who cares about you, it hurts me too. You should never forgive people who hurt me. And you'll notice when you read that Sumyoung's mom mostly disappears from this part of the story. She was such a huge presence up to now, so why the change? It's because if she was around, readers would tilt their sympathies too much towards Sumyoung, and that's no longer a useful narrative technique because Sumyoung isn't the top hero in this story anymore. She has slowly but surely begun to fall toward darkness, but all for a noble cause. What do I do about Seoul's life? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. How do I get rid of her? Somyoung starts well by encouraging Seoul to go to a center to help abuse victims, but she has a hard time confronting her abuse, Seoul does, because she ruminates and blames herself for it. Again, unfortunately, all too common in situations like this. You can see, though, that Somyoung still views Seoul as more of a means than an end. She thinks of Seoul through her own value system and goals. This is a ridiculous example, but if I had to compare how I feel to a similar situation, I would say it feels like I took in something everyone looks down on, like an abandoned dog, and loved and cared for it. But now it feels as though one day someone came and took it as if it was always theirs. Maybe unsurprisingly, Somyoung begins to get more controlling and manipulative towards Seoul. What I love about this as a narrative technique is that she's right, but it's important to do the right thing for the right reason. And little by little, you see Somyoung doing the wrong thing for the right reason. She wants Seoul to break up with her boyfriend after seeing him hit her, but remember that this is normal for Seoul, so she brushes it off. Somyoung doesn't understand how to counsel an abuse victim like Seoul, so she resorts more to manipulation. Seoul isn't in a position to pay for the treatment she needs for her infection, for example, so Somyoung offers to pay but on one condition. She needs to break up with her boyfriend. Right reason, wrong thing. The fact that her boyfriend's grandma helped her in the hospital only adds to the sense of loyalty that Seoul has for him. Seoul's response baffles Somyoung. Somyoung's own response? Why is it that your mom, your boyfriend, and even you don't care about you? You think I'm doing this for me? You must know by now this is all for you. Sound familiar? Somyoung hasn't turned heel just yet. Maybe she won't. She becomes Stone Cold Somyoung again on Seoul's dirtbag boyfriend in episode 70. Plus, she stands up for another mistreated kid named Gona, and that makes you want to cheer for her. But with her continuing to use money as leverage on Seoul, it feels like we're only delaying the inevitable. And what that means about Somyoung's seemingly buried desire to hold her mom accountable, your guess is as good as mine. Like mother, like daughter. So, what do you think is going to happen now? Is Somyoung going to pull the Stone Cold Steve Austin heel turn at WrestleMania 17? Or is she going to give the proverbial Vince the Stunner that Austin later wished that he did and keep fighting the right people so she stays a good guy in this story? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Either way, guys, I really appreciate the way Like Mother, Like Daughter tells its story, if that hasn't been obvious by now. It shows that you can have a really sympathetic character and then make her not so sympathetic by showing potentially dangerous traits and then putting them to use against another sympathetic character. The line between good and evil can be shockingly thin, and I just love how the tragedy in Like Mother, Like Daughter shows how thin that line can really be. It's hands down one of the best webtoons, and with less than 200,000 subscribers, it's one of the most underrated. So if you haven't given it a look yet, please do so. So that's all for now. And speaking of that line between good and evil, and speaking of professional wrestling, the next storytelling related video is probably going to be about how John Cena suddenly became cool. But I'm also making arrangements to explore the other side of this channel with some videos in the gym, starting with how you can protect yourself in a fight. What's the best stance for you to take? So make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and we will see you next time, hopefully in the gym. Keep writing and keep fighting, guys. We will see you later.